The really wonderful thing that I find about cinema is the fact that it could take so many forms. The way it presents itself can be in any sort of structure, but the thing is, we as audience members still expect certain conventions in storytelling. Yeah, well, one very popular expectation is that there should be interesting main characters that you follow and the story develops them. And audiences expect a dynamic plot. They expect to be invested in characters that are willing to go through with the entire thing. However, I feel like this expectation is very limited to to the grand scope that film can be. Film is very elastic. It can be about practically anything. And to go against all these expectations, I would like to introduce Two-Lane Blacktop. A 1971 road movie, directed by Monty Hellman. The presentation of Two-Lane Blacktop is so radical to me, it just expanded my brain on what a film could be. And I would also like to take a moment to introduce this film alongside the context of road movies in general. I would say there are 3 things that the road movie offers. First is that idealistic version of freedom, where the characters travel across the rural landscape, whether they are traveling because they are outrunning the law or they are just traveling for that feeling of adventure. The second component that I notice a lot in road movies is that it is the perfect genre for character development. These characters have to stay with each other for long periods of time, so there's bound to be conflict or resolved tension near the end of the movie. And the third thing I would say makes a really good road movie is fast cars, baby. Let's go! However, with these 3 things I have outlined, Two-Lane Blacktop either doesn't feature it or nullifies that. I think the most logical place to start out with talking about this film is to discuss the way the film presents its characters. The film presents these characters with no names. As the poster of this film says outright, we have the driver, the GTO, the mechanic, and the girl. They are simply referred to by their function within the story. And the film presents these characters as very mundane. They go about their life, their very simple life. They go to diners, they go to car races, and they talk only about cars.
I gotta check the points and the valves when we get there.
There's a 70 Camaro. 68 Barracuda, nothing there. There's a Roadrunner with a Hemi in it. 70 Cuda. They got some muscle here tonight.
How fast will she run? That depends on who's around.
I am reminded of another film called Vanishing Point, which also has a very underdeveloped main character. But the thing is, that film uses his blank exterior as a canvas to paint him as this martyr for freedom and rebellion.
The last beautiful free soul on this planet.
But Two-Lane doesn't present these characters as idols. Though the film presents their activities in a neutral light, the realist and stripped-down depictions come off more as bleak than ideal or fun. While this is very obvious in the way the film presents the driver and the mechanic, 2 characters that are ultimately interchangeable, the same can be applied to the GTO. Though his performance is much more lively and he's way more talkative, part of his character is that he's a liar. Even though this film takes place in 1971, this girl was definitely born after 1993 because all this bitch can do is lie.
Look shit for brains. I had those cops eating right out of my exhaust pipe. I had a police escort across the state line because my wife happens to be having a set of twins.
That's beautiful.
Well, yes, ma'am. I'm driving through to Florida. I bought my mother a house down in St. Petersburg, and I want to get down there and fix it up before she gets there.
I bought her in Bakersfield, California. I was testing jets at the time.
I want it flat out. I was driving a 55 stock Chevy across country, and I got in a race with this GTO for pink slips.
In a way, you have this opposite effect where the driver and the mechanic say so little. Meanwhile, the GTO says so much, but his words don't mean anything, and he's still ultimately left to be a shallow character. I think now it's time for me to talk about the plot. And now the plot, or the most plot we can scrape out of this. I would describe it as like watching a little RPG party form. The proposed main plot of the film is that the driver and the mechanic are racing the GTO to Washington, D.C. in order to win each other's pink slips for their cars. However, you not really quickly, you find out that the characters don't really care about really going through with the race. Part of it is that the driver and the mechanic realize that the GTO isn't very knowledgeable about cars.
I'll tell you another thing. You're not going to make it another 50 miles the way the carburetor is. You're leaking gas all over the engine.
But the structure of the film also implies a lack of urgency. Like, the leads still, go to diners, and they still go to little car races, and the GTO still picks up hitchhikers so he could spout more of his lies, too. Somebody has to stop this man. I'm not joking when I say that everything he says is a lie. And one key instance of this lack of urgency is near the middle of the film, where the characters have to stop into this town. The mechanic goes to unscrew a license plate and says,
What are you doing that for?
I get nervous around this part of the country.
All the characters then just sit around, idle around the town. They actually stay long enough in this town where the GTO ends up falling asleep. Bro was so close to unscrewing that license plate. And the thing is, in any other film, the leads would take this opportunity to get ahead. For any other movie, they would just leave the GTO behind. No, instead they drag his body so they can drive out of town with him so that he doesn't fall behind. And earlier, the mechanic had displayed a sense of caution towards the residents of the town, yet they still take their sweet ass time. Even the drive out of there, they're followed by the police, but it immediately cuts to the driver in a mechanic shop. The film is purposefully slowing down this plot. It wants to take its sweet ass time, which is really ironic considering what audiences are used to in other car media.
I've been scouting locations for a down-home movie on fast cars.
I want to bring up The Driver, a 1978 neo-noir crime movie that is similar to Two-Lane Blacktop in that it presents this existential, slow narrative and dehumanized characters with no names. Yet the film uses its cars to dial up the suspension action. This is a dramatically different depiction of cars as compared to Two-Lane Blacktop. In Two-Lane, much of the footage of the cars is shown of it taking a straight line. And what we get are these repetitive, simple images. Cars just become part of the natural environment. There's no soundtrack overlaid on the film. All the music in the film is entirely diegetic. The only music we really hear is when, say, the characters enter a diner and there's music playing. Or the GTO's records. Or when the girl is singing to herself. The music in something like Easy Rider is there to instill that sense of escapism, that glory, how fun it would be to do something like that. That is not there in Two-Lane. Instead, it creates a relaxing, meditative experience for the viewer. I would also like to touch on a character that I haven't really gotten time to speak up about.
Why can't Iris sit up front? What is this anyway? Some kind of masculine power trip?
To really briefly touch up on this, I can't help but compare the girl to Holly from Badlands. Both the girl and Holly serve as audience surrogates to a road movie, heavily contrasting with the strange men that they accompany. Their disinterest in the men puts a mirror to the empty life that those men lead, at least in the case of Two-Lane Blacktop, because at the end she leaves the three leads. The film also ends shortly after her departure. I'll talk about this more when I'm discussing the ending of the film, but I just wanted to get it out there right now. While I would usually describe the essence of this film as portraying absolutely nothing, I don't want to say this film doesn't exist for any real reason. There is still a message to be conveyed about presenting nothing. This film is one of the best portrayals about that numbing feeling of obsession, the depersonalization that one can experience when being completely obsessed with a certain lifestyle. I feel in regards to the driver and the mechanic, it's a mirrored reflection of the audience who could be obsessed with cars and road movies. The conversations about the best way to modify your vehicle to go as fast as possible would feel right at home for any car maniacs watching the movie. I'm not a car freak myself, so it took me some reading to realize that the GTO also knew jack shit about cars. And while he's not a car freak himself, necessarily, the GTO himself seems to represent that facade of escapism that is found in the road. Every hitchhiker he picks up, he just spells out lies and tales to make him look like this incredible guy that's been to so many places and has done so many things. But ultimately, as the film uncovers, the character is ultimately this hollow shell of a person that no one truly knows anything about. The film presents these obsessions as very mundane, as very normal. It's not heightened, it's not very dramatic. It's something very real and everyday and calming. I really love how radically this film presents this numbing idea of obsession, not only through the characters but also through the film's overall structure. This would also then tie into the ending of the film, which is particularly abrupt. For each character, it goes as follows. The girl leaves with a motorcycle boy that was in the diner. The GTO goes see ya and goes in the opposite direction, picking up some soldiers hitchhiking, which he then lies to. The driver and the mechanic had negotiated a race between some locals, and the film ends silently of the driver taking off as the film reel burns. I feel this in some ways offers the only real end to this car mania, that the characters within the film couldn't change their ways, so the film has to literally be shown destroyed in order to mark the end of this lifestyle. It's a bleak ending, and it leaves the audience in a state to really reflect on the life they just saw before them. The film implies a constant circle where these characters will continue to do what they do, repeating over and over, and never learning or changing. Despite the fact that these characters took a journey, they still end up in the same place they were before. Based on how it ends, along with this introspective tone, I don't believe the film is necessarily advocating a change in this behavior, but rather gives the audiences the freedom to assess what they think about that life. Kind of like how the characters treat the race in the film, where they can just decide not to really get too attached to it, where they can just choose, they have the freedom to abandon it.
Everything fell apart on me. My job, my family, everything. I had this job as a television producer, and I walked into the office.
I don't want to hear about it.
What do you mean you don't want to hear about it?
It's not my problem.